Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, today we look at the pipeline deal. What does it mean? Will there actually ever be a pipeline? Did Daniel Smith agree to some very serious environmental regulations in exchange for, I don't know, a question mark, whether there'll be a pipeline or not? But so many other issues covered in this discussion, including our relationship with the Indigenous community and, of course, the relationships between and amongst provinces and Team Canada. So we're going to the expert as promised. Heather Exner-Pirot, Director of Energy, Natural Resources and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. Also has worked for many years with Indigenous and Northern groups on the whole issue of energy development. So let's start at the beginning, if we can. Heather, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, great to be here.
So I'm going to read you a little note here of this is what somebody said somewhere on X. This is textbook Carney. By telling his opponent what they wanted to hear, he got what he needed, advancing the climate agenda and preserving his reputation on the file. What do you think?
Well, where to begin with all this?
Yes, where to
I,
begin is
I,
right.
I mean, I have to say, I think most of Alberta is very happy. I think a majority of the country is happy. We
Yep,
can get to some of the polling. I think,
yep,
I think this was a good move by Carney. I know, there's some pearl clutching on the left about how this maybe undermines some climate goals. I don't see it that way at all. This preserves in many ways that Alberta would continue and the oil and gas sector would
yep,
continue to aspire to climate goals. And you can say many things about Carney. He is good at math. And he not
yep.
only can look at the Canadian economy, he can look at public opinion polling, which it seems that many of his caucus have been unwilling to do, and also look at how global emissions are going and what's working to actually, kind of address that or not. So a big win, we can talk about, who won and who lost. I absolutely believe that Canada won on this deal. And it's hard
Yeah.
for me to think that a prime minister who delivered a big win for Canada won't at some point reap some political benefits from it.
All right, so let's take the same perspective on Danielle Smith because she has been working long and hard on this. And in terms of her dealings with the Americans, I think she's been quite astute. She's taken a lot of heat in her own province, even at the leadership contest on the week or the party gathering on the weekend. And yes, there was some unhappiness, but she seems to believe she is going to get an actual pipeline out of this. Are you that optimistic?
I am very optimistic on this pipeline. I will say a year ago, I thought the only purpose of Northern Gateway was to provide some leverage with the Americans on Keystone XL, to give them a fear of
Then
missing
everything
out.
changed.
Yeah, and then everything changed. So I think at the beginning it was like, well, let's pretend that we could build Northern Gateway. Hope they don't notice that we never could, and that will spur them to, make a better deal with Canada, maybe build Keystone XL. But it's clear in the last 10 months that, the geopolitical situation has changed, and the Canadian public has changed. And I very much think that Northwest Pipeline, I'm going to stop calling it Northern Gateway because that term brings a lot of
Okay.
baggage, but a Northwest Pipeline, it makes too much sense. And maybe the politics, will delay it for a year or 2 years or even 3 years. There will be a point when the price of oil is so good and the demand from our Asian allies is so high that it will be very difficult for anyone to stop that pipeline. It already has vast majority of support of the Canadian public. It obviously makes
Yeah,
economic sense, and Alberta is pretty determined to do it. So I absolutely believe that one day that pipeline will have to be built.
will happen. Okay, I want to go to Premier Eby, but I'm going to take a bit of a diversion just because you raised it and because the Prime Minister is again talking with Donald Trump in Washington. And again, the CUSMA, the free trade negotiations and discussions are sort of underway, or the review process is underway. What do you think this means for the relationship with the US right at this moment, and whether or not there will be a rebirth of Keystone and whether we'll have to continue to ship to the US and it's our only market for now until some of these other things come to fruition, if they do.
Well, I would say from the perspective of the oil and gas sector and from Alberta, we absolutely want to continue to grow, our market in the United States. It doesn't feel like an either or. It very much feels like an and. And there's obviously economic benefits of having an and of being able
Yeah.
to be exposed to Asian prices, Asian markets. It's the biggest energy market in the world. It's the fastest growing energy in the market in the world. Asia makes tremendous sense. But so does the United States. I mean, we all expect and anticipate a peak in shale. The United States actually just hit an 18-year high in oil demand. There had been a sense that maybe it had peaked. We're very much on the cusp of them hitting a new record. And it's less in gasoline and more in all the petrochemical feedstocks, jet fuel, all those other things. And so you can sense that they will probably need and want more Canadian oil. And that's why Enbridge is already expanding its main line by 400,000 barrels. That's very significant. 6 months ago, I heard the number 250. So I feel
Yeah.
like the economic situation has already changed enough that Enbridge is kind of maxing out what they think they could send there. In terms of leverage, though, President Trump is very transactional. He's often commented, you don't have the cards. I think at this point in the commodity cycle and with Canada's resources, we do have some cards. And if I
Yeah.
were the Americans, this is not the point in the commodity cycle where I would want Canada to be going, turning to Asia as the next customer for its oil, its gas, its critical minerals, its food. And so I think that was maybe a strategic error on the Americans' part, but it does feel pretty good on the Canadian side right now that actually there are a lot of people that do want what we sell. And for the first time in many years, it feels like there's some political willingness to help us get that to market.
There are a lot of people also pointing to what is going on in Venezuela and the president's laser-like focus on that, which is, of course, a huge supplier, but of much dirtier oil and product than what we create. But he may not be fussy, and that may be his counterweight to needing Canada if he gets his hand on Venezuela oil.
I mean, to some extent, that's true. Venezuela is a competitor. They produce heavy oil. We produce heavy oil, and the global market for heavy oil is much smaller than for light oil. A lot of the refineries, as people now know, it's a pipe from the oil sands to a refinery in the Midwest. There is no pipe to get it from Venezuela
Yes.
into the Midwest. So,
Yeah.
so some of the refinery kind of destinations, also in I would say, kind of around the Colorado area. Those ones are naturally, those will accept and look for Canadian oil. Very hard to displace that with Venezuela. And it's the Gulf Coast refineries that we'd be competing with Venezuela on. But I will say, like, we should be competitive with Venezuela. If I was, looking to put a dollar in a place, I mean, the political risk, even if this, first of all, if there's a war, production will probably go down for a little while.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
you have to wonder what kind of companies want to start betting and doubling down on Venezuela. Who knows what will happen in 3 years? Who knows what will happen in
Right.
5 years? Who knows if they'll nationalize again? Obviously, the political culture is very strong, kind of a tendency towards a strong man who's willing, with a socialist kind of backing. But all of this is another vote in favor of this Northwest pipeline. That you do see that a lot of the non-OPEC capital expenditures, the long life cycle oil that we will see coming online in the next 10 years is Gulf of Mexico, Venezuela, Guyana, Brazil. Canada, having direct access to the Pacific Basin, which, as I mentioned, is the faster growing energy market. Obviously, why wouldn't you want to take that competitive advantage instead of putting more oil into the Atlantic Basin, which is already well supplied?
All right, so that was my diversion. We're coming back to Premier Eby, who started in the wake of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, of saying basically over my dead body, will this ever happen? And within 48 hours was saying, well, okay, if you keep the tanker ban in place, then maybe I'd agree to the pipeline. And everybody's scratching their heads saying, there's no sense having a pipeline to bring the oil there if there's no tankers to put it on to take it to the people we want to sell it to. So what is he saying?
So, EB has been in a difficult position because, first of all, a pipeline is popular with majority of people in BC, but
Right.
it's not popular with the majority of people who vote BC NDP. And it's
Right.
definitely not popular with his caucus. And the other thing that EB has had to do this year is address BC's terrible fiscal situation. They've
Right,
had
of
4
course.
credit
Yeah.
downgrades, they have huge deficits, and the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest way to address that is with natural gas, LNG. It's a huge opportunity for BC. They have tremendous resources. So EB in the last year has had to pivot to embracing LNG, which he did not do before. And I think for him politically, how to sell that to his base is say that, well, we have the best clean natural gas. We can accept that, but we still hate bad, dirty Alberta oil. And there's not a lot of political cost within his base to be saying that. So that's how I see the political situation. EB also had his own leadership review right around the time that the budget vote happened. And so you saw some of the rhetoric, heat up. Very, and I thought his very scorched earth approach. Very much not looking to a solution or to address reasonable concerns on the environment, very much an ideological no. And so not in favor of that at all. But again, the numbers are not on EB's side. I mean, for any government, it's hard to take, and I've said this, it's hard to take the short side of a 70-30 issue. So EB has had, I think, to soften his stance. He's getting very bad press on this almost every day in the op-ed pages of the Vancouver Sun and Business in Vancouver. I don't think this whole episode has helped him very much politically. It's kind of rebranding him as that ideologue, that old, person leading protests, in the 2010 Olympics. So,
Yeah.
But now, this is the politics. Carney is going to have to give him, a way out, a way to save face, a way to kind of bridge all these gaps. And I hope smarter people than me can figure out how to do that.
Okay, the tanker ban, and that is the issue here, is federal. That is Mark
All
Carney's
of this is federal. All of this.
bailiwick, not got anything to do with Daniel Smith.
All of this is federal, and there's probably not a person in Canada who knows this better than David Eby, who was the Attorney General when Trans Mountain was going through and said that, BC was going to use every tool in the toolbox to stop it, and was told by court after court that no, they had no tools to stop it. So David Eby, a lawyer, knows this very well. They know what the offshore tanker ban is about. These are all in federal jurisdiction. There's nothing wrong with Alberta making negotiations with Canada as two separate levels of government. But I don't think anyone wants to ram this down BC's throat. It's expensive. It's disruptive. If there's a way to, get people in BC to accommodate reasonable concerns, and I think this pipeline absolutely can do that. I think the shipping of the oil absolutely can do it. I think they'll do it. But I just want to point out, Trans Mountain faced all of this opposition and more.
Yep.
And now look at it. Here it is. It's operating safely, and EB is saying, let's expand it, for God's sakes.
Okay, well, let's go into that because there it is. I don't think it's quite full yet, but it's approaching full TMX, right? I mean, and 70 or 80% capacity, something like
over
that.
80%. Their
Over
quarterly
80%.
statement just came out again last week.
Okay, so then what's wrong with getting a second piece of pipe and running it right beside the first piece of pipe? Because the hoops have all been gone through, the hurdles have all been crossed, the I's dotted, the T's crossed in all of this with the TMX deal. Would that be a faster, quicker, easier solution? Is it doable?
So Trans Mountain was already a twinning. And we know that the second twinning cost $34 billion. And the second time around, first time around was in the 50s. I think the whole thing was built in 2 years or something like that. Second time around, well, now you're putting a pipe through Canada's third largest city. Very expensive. They actually drilled a couple kilometer hole through Burnaby Mountain to avoid some neighborhoods. Very expensive. And then the port is fairly congested, and it's not an ideal port. But Trans Mountain has already said, again, this thing's only been operated just for over a year and a half. And already it's nearing, capacity. So people are saying, oh, it's not full. Well, it hasn't even been 2 years, and it's getting pretty full. It's proving that there's a lot of heavy demand in Asia, actually. And Trans Mountain already has come out last week, actually, and said, we're looking to expand this by 360,000 barrels a day. I'll point out, just like Enbridge, 6 months ago, they were saying 200,000 to 300,000 barrels a day. So already they're looking at ways. They know the demand is there. How can, what is the highest number we can expand this? And right now that number is 360,000 barrels. That's not building new pipe. It's doing some, improvements, efficiencies, all this. But some of the problem is with the endpoint of the
Yeah.
size of the carrier that you can take oil on, how busy the Vancouver port is. They are going to do some dredging as part of getting more oil out of that pipe. That you can have deeper ships come in. Right now, they go in and they only come out 70% full, and they have to be offloaded onto another ship. So that will help a great deal. But if you're looking at like, what would you do if you were smart? If
Yes.
you can
Okay, there's a good place to start.
if you were smart, what would you do? I mean, if you want to do another million barrels, and we think there's the demand, that's the important thing people are missing. We think there's a demand for another million barrels a day into the Pacific Basin.
Yeah.
And Prince Rupert just looks a lot better. Like it's just a deeper port. It's not as congested. It's the prize, really.
So just do that. I mean, I think we discussed this the last time you were with us here, which is the IEA, the International Energy Agency, basically said we're nowhere near peak oil here. We can see growing demand out to 2050 at the very least.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, everyone's kind of been saying it for the last 2 or 3 years. The IEA was often held up kind of by the climate community of, look,
Yeah,
and even they've, kind of come to Jesus this year and said, well, actually, if you look at what's actually happening, not a scenario based on how fast you want to achieve climate goals, not a scenario based on what politicians have said they're going to
right.
accomplish. See, some of Canada's goals are also shifting, not to mention the Americans. But based on demand, what do we expect to happen? And oil, even if it does peak and even if it slightly declines, will still be the top source of energy in the world in 2050, according to the IEA. And there's other projections, from BP or Exxon or OPEC
Yeah.
that would expect quite a bit more growth. But people also don't appreciate, let's for easy math, let's say there's 100 million barrels. There's a couple million more than that. But if you just divide that, you lose if you just didn't put in any more investment, any more exploration. You would lose, I think, about 5 to 7 million barrels of that a year. And this is a non-renewable resource. There's not every country that can produce as much in 10 years or in 20 years as they're producing today. In fact, you see a few countries having kind of a peak. So Canada not only has the opportunity to maintain its market share, let's say it just
Yeah.
plateaus and is at this level, but to grow the market share of those producers who are not able to produce at this level in the future. And I would count Mexico, Norway, United States, all of our friendly, allies in the OECD are in that category except for Canada.
Yeah. And people keep raising this question everywhere. You see it in editorials and even on places like X, which is every other country in the world that has resources, not nearly as many as we do. It's a national project. We all come together and say, yes, this is how we're going to build our economy. Only in Canada do we spend day after day after day fighting about it instead of getting it out of the ground and to the customer who wants it.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting sociological question. Why would that be? A
Yes,
little
it
bit
is.
of a little bit of the answer is that the royalties largely accrue to provinces, and so there is a lot more benefit for Alberta for oil, for BC for natural gas, for Saskatchewan for oil, than there is in central Canada. And there is a bit of a shift in the balance of power that happens when oil prices are high. So that's my
Yeah.
explanation. I guess caring for the environment can be part of it. It's not really a top priority for Canadians right now. It's only a top priority for 13. It's a top three priority for only 13% of Canadians right now. So it's not popular, like it to be
Yeah.
against a pipeline. It's very popular before a pipeline. So it's very hard for me to understand. Again, this is a pipe, and I talked about it yesterday. There's over 840,000 kilometers of pipeline,
I saw that. Like we all
fossil fuel
probably have a
pipeline in this country.
pipeline.
Yeah, we know how to build this safe. Like
Yeah.
it's literally under your feet on your sidewalk when you walk around your houses. There's a natural gas pipeline underneath you, and to think that this is some kind of catastrophe to build, another 1,000 kilometers on top
Yeah.
of the 840,000 that we already have, it just kind of defies logic.
It's the other question about the tankers too. Elizabeth May took to the blackboard with her pointer to say this is all going to be a disaster if it goes here and goes there. But in point of fact, the tankers are, technology has changed that. They're double hulled, they're safer, there's more. well, just
Monitoring.
measures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not really, this is not even the Exxon Valdez. It's not even that kind of a situation. We've gone far and away beyond that.
Well, absolutely. And if BC wants to say we will only do this if this is, amongst the best world-class standards of marine safety. No
Mm,
problem. Like,
yeah.
sure, of course, we will meet those standards. But we move, tens of millions of barrels of oil on water every day in this world. We receive it on the other side of the country on the East Coast. We ship it on the West Coast out of Vancouver now. No one has noticed. No one has died in the Salish Sea. So to me, like there is no scientific, nor is there a legal rationale for this tanker ban. I think that was, it was approved, by the way, under the National Energy Board before the decision was overturned based on Indigenous consultation, and then Trudeau rejected it altogether. So this has been studied, it's been evaluated. You can absolutely move oil safely. We all do every day in this country and around the world. And if anyone was acting in good faith on the opposition side, they would come and say, this is the risk that we want mitigated. This is what we're worried
Yeah.
about. That is not the discussion that is happening. The discussion is happening is day one, no, never over my dead body. And that's, that's not what you do in a democracy, frankly.
No, it isn't. And the other thing, the other bit of evidence is that this ban would only apply to Canadian tankers. We let American and international tankers run amok
Well,
out in the
and
water.
and and all those communities in that same tanker ban area require, diesel and
Yeah,
gasoline to be supply their own communities. So it's not as if there's no oil being transported in
yeah.
those waters. It is, and those communities absolutely need that. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be a lot safer when it's a large tanker, double hauled with the insurance, the liability, all those things. It's going to be a lot safer to transport, those tankers than the small boats that kind of are resupplying communities.
So the big issue is, and the Prime Minister met this week with the AFN and Indigenous groups everywhere, the coastal Indigenous groups. You've worked with some of these folks. Some of these folks have also been funded by foreign organizations that have stirred up, anti-environmental protests or pro-environment protests,
Yeah.
but anti-pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. So where are we on the question of relations with the Indigenous? We had the problem this week of Mr. Hodgson, the minister, saying in that kind of who cares mindset that we seem to be seeing a lot from the cabinet these days. Maybe I didn't make the in-person meetings, but we can do it on Zoom. Never mind. He had to apologize. But where are we at? Is when we talk about free and prior informed consent, is that a veto or is it not a veto? And when we talk about meaningful engagement, is that really consultations? Like, what are we supposed to do? Does anybody know?
I mean, everyone knows, and this is what, we're making this overcomplicated. We've just gone through this with Coastal GasLink and with Trans Mountain. And the jurisprudence on the duty to consult and accommodate, which was affirmed by the Supreme Court back in 2004, 2005, was absolutely tested, clarified on this exact question, an interprovincial pipeline through First Nation territory in BC with the TMX expansion. So we have a very good idea of what is required. And we know that consent is not a requirement in Canadian law. The objective is to achieve consent. That is what you're going for. You're going in good faith with the honor of the Crown to go listen to the concerns Indigenous communities have, to how it might impact their hunting, their Aboriginal and treaty rights, and to do everything you can to mitigate those impacts. And yes, and we've built 840,000 kilometers of pipe in this country. We know how to mitigate those impacts. So I don't think there will be an argument that will, by a legal standard, be considered reasonable that you couldn't possibly mitigate the impacts of a pipeline through a territory. But it is also absolutely true that BC First Nations have a bad taste in their mouth from Northern Gateway, and that there is quite a bit of opposition to the idea. And so it's absolutely not in anyone's interest to start going in there and say, we don't care what you think. You
Right.
can't stop us. The feds can say yes. That isn't like that will not serve anyone's purposes. And they maybe there hasn't been consultation yet because, as everyone points out, there isn't a project yet.
Right.
Now Alberta is going to put a project forward. It says it's going to be the proponent. That will give it a responsibility to start the consultation. And I can say that I know some of these conversations, not consultation perhaps, but conversations have started. But I've seen all this before. We went through 10 years of hearing how Indigenous people were against pipelines in BC when CGL and Trans Mountain were developed. And we know that ultimately both of those projects were developed with majority Indigenous support.
Right.
They're
They
now
weren't opposed.
operating.
Right.
They're now operating. They are now safe. CGL will have Indigenous equity. Trans Mountain will very likely have Indigenous equity. And we very much improved the financial tools available to bring financial benefits to Indigenous communities on pipelines in the last 5 years. I think there's probably 6 pipelines now that have some kind of Indigenous consortium ownership. So I just feel like there will be a way to thread this needle, but no one is going to be ramming this through. But everyone, I had to say, there's a reciprocal duty on the part of Indigenous nations to also act in good faith and to articulate what their specific concerns are and to be open to solutions to address
Well,
them.
and settle the issues amongst themselves. This is the problem too. We have conflicting demands amongst the groups, all of whom want to be the go-to person, the arbiter of this. But there is disagreement amongst groups, Native representative groups, and that needs to get sorted out too, so the governments know who they're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're seeing this in another case that has already been referred to the Major Projects Office, by the way, the Silesum's LNG and the Prince Rupert
Right.
Gas Transmission Pipeline that feeds it. And that is an Indigenous-led project. And ISGA are the proponents of that project. So there's obviously some Indigenous support. It's been referred, both BC and Canada support it. It's been approved.
Right.
And it's just waiting for a final investment decision. It'll very likely happen. But the standard on that pipeline and that project was not unanimous consent. And that can't, I just had to reiterate, that cannot be a standard in a democracy, that any group
Of
has
course.
a veto over these things. But the standard is for the government to act in good faith and seek to obtain. That's the UNDRIP standard,
Yeah.
to act in good faith and seek to obtain free prior informed consent, not to obtain it, to seek to obtain it. And so absolutely the government has to do that. The Alberta's proponent will have to do that. But on the flip side, you can't just say no just because you're ideologically opposed to it.
So the UNDRIP, and for those who may have missed this, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So it came from the UN. It came from an international foreign body. We adopted it
Yes.
here and said, yes, we agree in principle. There was a huge battle at the time, of which we were all part here in the House of Commons and the Senate and whatnot. So, do you think there is agreement amongst the Indigenous groups as to what that really means?
No, I mean, there isn't in Canada. And this is, as I mentioned, Trans Mountain almost put in the last piece of the puzzle of the Canadian courts, establishing what is in the duty to consult and accommodate. What do we mean by that term? What is
Yeah.
the obligation or the expectation? And just as that was settled, BC and Canada added this other, kind of threw another bomb into it and said, also, you have to follow UNDRIP. And the legislation is not at all clear on what they think that means. And so now we're going through the whole, we went through 15 years to clarify what duty to consult and accommodate was. Now we're starting this horrible process of going through the courts because the House of Commons was not clear, the government was not clear, the legislation was not clear. Now the courts have to clarify what this means. And so that will be a painful, expensive process, frankly. And we are seeing, we're all waiting on a Kabawik decision, which had to do with Canadian nuclear labs, which is slightly different because there is a special provision in
We should just reference, there was, in British Columbia, there was also a court case, the city of Richmond, which basically has been declared, Indigenous territory, and those people who are not Indigenous that happen to own homes or businesses in there are caught totally in the middle. They don't know whether they own their homes, and they can't sell them because the value has gone to zero while this is up in the air.
the Cowichan decision. So this is unhelpful. We just need clarity,
Yeah,
and some people, I'll say some lawyers benefit from a lack of
of
clarity.
course.
But it is up to governments, frankly, to provide the clarity. And I think there has been a lack of courage on the part of governments, to be very clear, to say in black and white what things mean. And as a result, we have a lot of confusion. So, and I've written on this, I'm a political scientist. I'm not a lawyer. And looking at all this all seems to me, crazy. The Canadian legal system, by definition, is adversarial.
Yeah.
There's two parties kind of, arguing kind of against each other or submitting different claims. I've always been attracted to economic development because everyone can win in economic development. You can have a win-win. And whereas I've seen, kind of so much of this discussion mired on the legal side and on the right side, where there's been so much progress, and I would say benefits for Indigenous people as well as all Canadians, is on the business side. And where you do have negotiations and you have made business transactions and everyone is making more money, everyone is more prosperous. So I just would like the emphasis to move away from a rights or legal-based discussion into an interest-based discussion and talk about how can we both meet our mutual interests in this? How can we both be winners in this, which is impossible generally on the legal side?
The other issue that seems to be out there is Ottawa going to give taxpayers' dollars to Indigenous groups to become paid participants, to become investors in these projects? Is that money just going to flow from Ottawa? Is that how we're going to resolve this?
I mean, I think that's how we're going to resolve it. And I would say, that is, in the oil and gas CEO's letter,
Yeah.
that was the thing they said is provide this is a way to thread the needle. Again, and you mentioned I've done a lot of work with Indigenous communities, lots of different opinions, but in general, what you hear, and even the chief of the AFN, Nefanek, is also saying this, is they're not against resource development. They're against being left out of resource development.
Yeah.
So the smart money and the smart people, the people who are willing to work hard at this and be frustrated once in a while, on both sides, by the way, is to say, well, how can we make this work for both of us? How can you benefit from the resources that are being taken from your territory that is impacting your cultural rights and your, traditional territory? And equity has turned out to be a very good solution to this. And the reason, a lot of First Nations, they have reserve land. You cannot use that as collateral, and nothing on reserve land can be used as collateral. As a result, they don't have credit. And so they can't be involved in these bigger projects in a meaningful way as most other business partners would be involved. So what the solution has been, and Alberta started this, by the way, Jason Kenney and Stephen Buffalo, is to say, we will be the backstop. We will guarantee your loan. It's not the taxpayers are not providing the money, by the way. It's not coming out of the budget. It's not coming out of my taxpayer dollars. We're just telling the bank that we're going to guarantee the loan. That's it. But they will get the government's credit rating, and they will get the
Yes.
government cost of borrowing, which tends to be the very lowest. The government of Canada has the lowest cost of borrowing, I think, probably in the world. You know what I mean? So you're
Yeah.
getting capital at 4%, whereas if these Indigenous communities had to go to the market with the risk that would come with it, they would get 16, 18, 20% is what they'd have to pay for capital. If you're buying into a pipeline and you have to pay 18% interest, you're not making any money. If you're paying 4% interest, you're making
Yeah.
a ton of money. So that is what is the solution, is for government to lend their credit rating to these nations and backstop. And it's worked great, and it's been win-wins. And I think it's a great solution. It isn't the solution for every single project and
Right.
single situation, but it is a great tool in the toolbox. And the federal government is now willing to use it also.
Okay, I've got two more things for sure I want to talk about, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. The industrial carbon tax, again, highly controversial, although this was an Alberta project in the first place. This is part of the evidence that Daniel Smith kind of gave away the store, that the tax is there. The other big issue, and I really want your take on this, is carbon capture. The Prime Minister is so focused on capturing carbon and the Pathways Alliance, and there's a lot of stuff written by the environmental community, the scientific side of the environmental community, saying this is just like a big black hole that we're pouring billions of dollars into to capture carbon when we're not really the problem globally anyway in terms of contribution to emissions. But to what end? Can you just talk to us a little bit about carbon capture?
Yeah, well, for sure. And I'll take a bit of a positive approach. Is the
Of
pathways
course
aligned?
you will.
I will.
We're going to put under here, Pollyanna, because we really love that attitude.
I'm very happy this week. So, is it expensive? Yes. And if you don't, if you don't think any incremental emissions reductions are worth anything, then okay, I do understand the concerns. But let me tell you on the flip side a few things. One is that I have heard this from oil sands companies behind closed doors. They believe this and they say this behind closed doors. We are competitive on price. We are not competitive on carbon. And you're not getting a big premium these days for a barrel that is lower carbon, but maybe in the future you will, or maybe it is just easier to market to a Japan or to a Korea if you can say, actually, we are on the better side. And
Okay, but can I just stop you there for a sec, Heather? Because that's sort of at the core of the Prime Minister's justification for this, which is we'll never be able to sell our oil and gas unless we're, net zero, carbon clean, all of this. I don't hear that from people that are countries that are trying to wean themselves off Russian oil. They
no,
just want oil.
no, this is absolutely true. And I mean, we all know 90% of our oil goes to the United States, and that is not
Yeah,
a concern of them at all. But
right.
like I say, if you are competing, and all other things being equal, if you can say, well, we're lower emissions, maybe a refinery in Japan is going to, kind of optimize to accept our heavy oil instead of Venezuelan. But but they have been working and they have been spending. I have to reemphasize, these are publicly traded companies that
Hmm.
are held accountable to their board and to their shareholders. And they have been putting this money and they have been putting this effort. They've
Good
gotten their
point.
emissions intensity down 30%. I wrote a study just a few months ago. The emissions intensity of the average oil sands barrel is now only 1 to 3.
This one?
That's a different one, but that's also a good one. It's only 1 to 3% higher than the average barrel in the world, not a heavy oil barrel, the average barrel. And there are some things we can do. Maybe it will be a 20 billion CCS project. Hopefully it won't be that you could get that down so that we are on the better half of that. In which case you're better off keeping Canadian oil, heavy oil in the mix, than displacing it, certainly with Venezuela, but I think almost any other heavy oil. But then the other thing that was important in this deal that people don't appreciate is that it finally recognized enhanced oil recovery. And it is a thing that, in a lot of reservoirs, you might only get 15% of the
Yeah.
hydrocarbon out of it. Taking the excess carbon dioxide, pumping it down will help you get more of that. You are enhancing
We've
your
got
oil
some great
recovery.
projects like that in
People
Saskatchewan. We're
already do
doing this
this.
exactly that.
Yes.
Yeah.
They do it already because it already
Yeah.
made economic sense. So now if you can do that, you're sequestering carbon. You get a price to do it, and you're getting more and the royalty holder, the people of Saskatchewan or Alberta,
Yeah.
getting more, we are being able to capture more of the value of the resources under our feet. You're not abandoning all those hydrocarbons, for decades to come. So all of which to say we don't know yet what the details are on the carbon price. People don't like a carbon price, so going up instead of down is not seen. But I also don't think Danielle Smith is stupid. I don't think the people in
No.
the energy ministry are stupid. They are in talks with oil sands companies who are accountable to shareholders, who have to be savage in making in their break-even costs. And so I just can't believe that all these people are going to conspire to make themselves uncompetitive. The oil sands companies cannot agree to any deal that will make them uncompetitive. They would just put their capital elsewhere. And so we have to, I just feel like let's be patient and see what's on the table before you make judgments, because I do trust that these people are smart.
Yeah. So the Pathways Alliance project that's been around, that's going to go forward. But you do know the criticism that this is somehow, really necessary for the Prime Minister politically to keep his values, and I mean by that the title of his book, but his reputation for the last 20 years as sort of the the climate thought leader, and he was trying to commandeer the finance industry to use its billions upon billions of dollars to change behavior. That seems to be kind of disbanding at this point. That this is more about him saving environmental face than is really about the value for every dollar invested.
Well, I think that's probably true, but
Okay.
politics do matter, and the
Right,
government
right,
is
right.
in charge. I
Yeah,
this is, has been, I think, one under, discussed aspect of this. If you're an investor from a different country, you really don't care about our politics, except for you don't want everything, you don't want an investment at risk because an election happens.
right, right.
And to have both the conservative and liberal governments want to remove the emissions cap, to have both of
Right.
them want to build a pipeline, to have both of them move into the pragmatic middle, this is so helpful because now I love oil and gas. I'm from Alberta. Maybe probably have
Yeah.
government what met my needs. But if for an investor, you would have had in the back of your mind what happens when the Liberals get reelected. Now that's not in the back of anyone's minds. This is apple pie and motherhood stuff in
Yeah.
Canada now.
Yeah.
The Canadian public is fully in support of it. And this is what it looks like on the Liberal side. It's not bad. It's not perfect, but it's certainly not bad. And it might even get better on the Conservatives. But money can start to settle in here based on what Carney has done.
All right, because I think that is an issue about creating the circumstances, because that's the other thing that people are saying this week. We had C5, which allows the government to decide when the big bad bills, as Daniel Smith calls them, apply and when they don't. And we have an MOU that says we'll lift the emissions cap if you do this, but the industrial carbon price has to be that. Like, if we just sort of freed the thing up and just took the stranglehold of the regulatory sector away, it wouldn't be a question for industry. People would be investing in this country faster than they could, deposit the checks.
Ken, again, I'm going to be optimistic here because this is a true, and I said it, as quoted this week, under Justin Trudeau, the sector was punched in the face every
Yeah.
year. Every budget, you got another punch in the face. And Carney has stopped punching us in the face. And actually, he's even done a handful of good things. Um, the
And got two standing ovations in front of
Yeah,
the.
exactly. So, and part of it, I say there's push and pull factors. This is happening at the right time in the commodity cycle. So you can say, some of this was because it's going to be hard for any government in Canada at this point in the commodity cycle to say no, we don't want to develop oil and gas. When prices start to get better, when shale starts to peak, when Asian demand starts growing, and when the price starts to improve, we're chomping at the bit for a new million barrel pipeline when oil's at $60 a barrel. Wait until it's $80 or $90 a barrel. There will be no one able to stop that pipeline at that point. So already in the last few months, Canadian oil and gas index of stocks has outperformed the S&P index of oil and gas and has also outperformed the S&P 500. Canadian oil and gas stocks are doing very well. And part of it is because people are looking at shale that is starting to deplete and they want to see where else can they put the money. And because there's a little bit of a sense out there in the big world that Canada is not going to be blocking its oil and gas development as it used to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
and
these.
and so it's already people I get why there's skepticism and even fatalism, but I'm telling you that the money has noticed, and Enbridge, and we have 760,000 barrels before this other pipeline
Yeah.
of new egress that is getting developed. That gives the sector the ability to grow for the rest of this decade. And so so things are actually looking quite good around here.
Just a final quick
Yeah.
word on the industrial carbon tax, because that's the other thing. They took away the carbon tax, the domestic, the individual carbon tax that everybody was paying. Farmers were getting killed, truckers were getting killed, etc. We've still got the industrial carbon tax, and that has to go up. The Ottawa has said that must be a larger number at some point, so that needs to go up. And I'm hearing the farmers and other people say, yeah, but that those costs are going to be passed on and we're still going to be paying the bill for that. What's your take on the industrial carbon tax and the kind of the built-in increase?
Well, again, one of the things that the oil and gas CEOs asked for and Danielle Smith asked for was for Alberta to control its industrial carbon price through the tier
Yeah.
system. It should go to the provinces, not the feds. That has been agreed to. And if people remember the consumer carbon price, the provinces all got the money and then the provinces could distribute how they wanted
Right.
to. And again, we don't know the details yet. But if you assume, okay, the price is going to go up $230, not, and probably over a much longer time frame than what it was supposed to go to 170 to 2030. Now it's going to go to 130, I'm assuming to 2040 or even 2050. So much longer time frame. If Alberta gets those revenues, it can reallocate those to industries that are hardest hit in whichever way that it wants to. That money will stay in the province. It can lower taxes. It can provide other subsidies. However it wants to redistribute the money, it'll be up to Alberta. And same, and I would assume Saskatchewan, everyone else would want to get the same kind of deal. Saskatchewan's just not doing it at all anyways. So all of which to say is there are ways for Alberta to make it work for those that are paying that high price. Again, by compensating them financially and other ways to ensure that the goal will always be to ensure that our product is competitive and is finding a bigger, better market.
So just put as your final comment here a timeline. If you were a betting person, are you betting on the grand bargain? Or are you betting that we will see a pipeline, I don't know, in the next, at least begin in the next few years, that there will be the pieces in place?
My PhD is in international relations, and if I just look at this from a 30,000-foot view, will Canada produce more oil and gas in an energy insecure scarcity situation? Could any country turn that down? No, it can't. For me, it's just a matter of time. The only question is, how hard are we going to make it on ourselves? Are we going to do it the easy way or the hard way? And we seem to always choose the hard way. I don't think that's in our best interest.
I know.
But I'm telling you, there will be demand for this oil. People and the more that shale declines, the more that the price of a barrel goes up, the more that Asia is insecure and is asking its ally Canada to help it out. The pressure will only grow from this point.
Yeah.
And already we're at 70% political, public support for it, and the feds are making moves. So I just can't see that becoming less in the next 5 years.
Well, this is a brilliant tour through everything. I tried to pick every question that I'd heard this week raised from somebody, and you've just taken it on. I know you've been everywhere this week trying to answer it. We really appreciate your time. Heather's the Senior Fellow and Director of Energy, Natural Resources and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And this paper that I held up before, which you can probably find on their website, is called Constraining Canada, the Costs of Environmental Idealism. And I think you think that we're moving on.
I mean, eventually interests overtake values. That is the way of the world.
Exactly
That's what a realist believes. So,
yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, but we love what's in your head and your willingness to share it. So we'll see you again, I'm sure, very soon, Heather.
yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Heather Exner-Pirot speaking to us, I think, from Calgary this morning. I'm not sure. That's where you are. And that's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Waller. And we'll see you very soon again as well. Thanks, everyone.